this is Kevin from Pixelvert.com. I recently saw the trailer for Fast and Furious 6 and thought of doing something based on one of the posters for the film. So if you don't know about the Fast and Furious series, it's a bunch of films about fast cars, bad boys, sexy girls. Those things seem to always go together. Ludicrous. And nice looking posters. So this is vaguely based on one of the posters, and I just wanted to demonstrate some of the techniques you can use in After Effects CS6 to position 3D objects together and achieve this kind of effect with the lighting. So pretty easy to do, but I'm not going to be aiming for exactly the same result. I'm using a couple of fonts. They're both available to download for free, so I'll have the details for the fonts in the description. The first thing I want to do is to look at the composition. This is the final product, roughly speaking, what we're aiming for. 2 layers of text, bit of reflection going on between the two of them, and in the background we've got this nice looking blurred out car. Just applied some blur to this using Fast and Furious blur, and yeah, you can use whatever image you like for your background. I'm sure if you look at a couple of Fast and Furious posters, you'll get roughly the idea of what they're going for. I want to first of all show you the settings I use for this composition. So I'm just basically working with a composition, this one here, plus also a few documents that I brought in to work with my project. I'm going to create new composition, and the settings are 1920 by 1080, square pixels 24. I've given it a duration of 10 seconds, although for this particular one I really am just interested in a still image. We may use some of this time to create a short animation. In the advanced section I've chosen Ray Trace 3D, and we're going to be working with a ray trace quality of 3. You can always up the quality for your final render, but it's always best to work with low settings and then increase the quality for your final render. I might actually change this to 2 because I think with all the screen recording software, my computer is going to be under quite a lot of stress. So that was basically what I did. We're working in 8-bit per channel. You can change that later again if you want to, but we'll get rid of this and work with the original one. So there's a couple of documents here. One is the original that I created, and we'll use that as a reference from time to time, but the background is going to be this image here. So we're going to start off by creating some text. And I want to create the Fast and Furious text first of all. I'm using a font called Tondu. You can try the other font that I'm going to be using and see how that works out as well. Now the size is going to be 243. And I'm going to change this width here to 100 and then scale it up a bit later. So we're going to choose a color for the text. It's going to be a really dark blue color. I might actually sample it from here. So we're going to choose a really dark blue, chosen 215 for the hue, 89 for the saturation, and the brightness is 7%, so a very dark blue. And we're just going to type in Fast and return Furious, and that looks fantastic. It's all bunched up together there. What we'll do is turn on this car layer, see what's going on there. I think this has been changed. I think this should be at auto. So that's what it looks like if you just type it in with the standard settings. And what we need to do is to change some of these. So we need to change the F so that it's a lot larger, 420. And the other F as well, and that's going to be 420. No, 420 up here. Next, you notice that the space between the two has increased. We'll deal with that a bit later on. I think that's why I changed that for my original design. I'm going to actually select the top row. We're going to change the AV. This is the tracking for the top layer. We're going to change that to, I think we're going to change that to 87, and for the bottom row we're going to change that to 75. I want to just line up the top of the text. If you look at the original, you'll see that the text is kind of like lined up at the top rather than at the bottom, and there's that signature FF at the beginning, which looks pretty cool. We're going to drop the F here, and to do that we use this setting here. You gotta have the character panel open, window, character panel, Control 6, and what you can do is to change this, and that will move it up or down. So we're going to move it down, and in fact I'm going to take it down to -125, and we're going to do the same for this guy here. This has to go down as well. So it's going to be -125. Now we can bring these together, and I think this is where this measurement comes in. We need to change this. We'll change it to 226, and we'll see. That looks fantastic. So that's 226. Hit enter, and then we've got to move this particular F away from this one here. So I'm gonna go there and use shift left arrow to select it, and we are going to, actually I'm not going to do that, I'm just going to add a space there, and then we'll do shift and left arrow to select the space, and we're going to reduce the width of that space until we get a really nice looking space between the two F's there. Everything's flowing together nicely now. I'm going to select everything, and I think we do need to change the width of this text. So I'm going to change the width of the text to 126. So it's now looking pretty large and a lot more substantial than the original. That was the original, that was ours. I think this is going to kind of like shorten up once we put the camera there. And let's do that. Let's add a camera. So we'll choose layer, new camera. I'm using an 80mm preset, which seems to work well with this. And I'm just going to make sure the depth of field is turned off, because that is really not necessary. That's great. And we might as well just rotate the text a little bit, and we'll do that by rotating the camera. So I'm going to choose C on the keyboard to bring up the camera, and let's see, let's just rotate this text a little bit. And we can't see anything happening, so I'm going to undo that, make sure that that's undone, and we'll make this a 3D layer, and we'll try again. We're just going to rotate this so that it's at an angle. You always find with this Fast and Furious text, it's always at some kind of dynamic angle, and I think the font that they use is actually a lot more dynamic than the one that I'm using here. V to bring up the move tool, just move things a little bit like that. See, I'm going to leave it like that and we'll adjust it later. I'm not going for the exact same kind of composition. We'll just go with this for the time being. I wanted to do the 6 as our background text. I'm just going to open up, I'm going to change the render quality to draft, and we're going to choose 2 views, and I'll just make sure that this second view is also in draft. And what we'll do is just position the 6. So I'm going to bring up the text tool once again, and what we want to do is to just enter some text there. I'm just going to turn this guy off, and we'll just enter some text. So it's going to be a big old 6. As you can see in this font, the 6 doesn't look great, but everything else would look great. The Fast and Furious, except this ampersand, will look pretty, I'm sure it will look pretty okay with the other text I'm going to use. And the other text is going to be Bitstream Vera Songs, or Vera Song, and we're going to choose bold, and we need to scale this up to 1160. Just move this there like that. And I think with this guy here we need to have a width of 150. So you can use these character panels to do some pretty awesome stuff when you want a particular text kind, when you want a particular style of text. Let's see what we're doing here. Make this into a 3D object so we can see it there, and we can now turn on the Fast and Furious text. So they're lined up together. We need to put the 6 behind the Fast and Furious. So I'm going to bring up the move tool and just move the 6 behind like that. We want them to be pretty close together, but with the 6 just a little bit behind. And we might as well change the color of the 6. So I'm going to sample the original 6, And let's see what color we've got. I'm sure this is too bright, but let's just darken that a little bit. So it's going to be 75 for the brightness, 78 for the saturation, 218 for... I'm going to sample elsewhere actually. I think that's a bit too bright and awesome. We're going to sample there. Let's just sample right there. It's not coming out. Let's try that. That's it. So we've chosen 219, 78% saturation and 35% brightness. I'm going to make that a little bit brighter, just a tiny bit brighter. Saturation can stay where it is, and I'll take the hue down just a little bit. Just bring out a little bit more green into there. And that's excellent. We might move them closer together, but we will have to add a bevel and we'll have to extrude both of the text layers. I'm going to move the text layers together just to organize things, and we'll work on the geometry. So I'm going to first of all open up the Fast and Furious, go to the geometry options. You want to get these in the Ray Trace 3D composition setting. If you're working with the CPU alone, you probably have to use Fast Draft whilst you're composing, maybe even wireframe, and then occasionally move up to the final quality when you're ready to test out a render. Now the settings here apply to each view separately. So if I go to this view here, I have to change the settings there separately, but the composition settings up here apply to everything in this composition, so all the layers are affected by the settings up there. What we'll do is to just change the geometry. So we're going to change the extrusion depth to around 50, which is probably a lot more than they use in the Fast and Furious, but I want something slightly chunkier. And we're going to change the bevel depth to 10, which is the maximum, and we'll change the style to convex. Now that does absolutely nothing except change the shape here. So let's do something that will show us what's going on. First thing is to go to the environment, to the project, and I've got this kind of cityscape here. I'm going to bring that in. It's just a picture of a bunch of city buildings. You can use whatever image you like. I just like this because of the whole bluish green thing going on inside that image. I think it works well with this particular design. I'm going to right click and change that into an environment layer, and then we'll open up the options and just change the appears and reflections to off. So I'm going to click that, change it to only, so it will only appear in the reflections, and we're not going to have anything more to do with this particular layer. So I'm going to shy it down and just get it out of the way. That hasn't done very much, so we'll add a light layer, new light, and we're going to go for a blue light, maybe a bit. Let's change the settings there just a little bit. Saturation is going to go up, so hue 224, saturation 48, brightness 80%, intensity 920. I think that will do. We'll have cast shadows and see how that works out. We might change that later on. And that's kind of like burning everything out. So let's just turn off the original, and we'll now work with this particular design. I think I accidentally changed my background into a 3D layer there. That's not something I want to do. We'll work with this light first of all. So I'm just going to move the light towards the right. Let me just see what the settings there are. So the transformation is over here. I'm going to move this light all the way to the right like that. Maybe rest it there, and then just move it forwards like this, so it's kind of like around. It's going to be affecting this side more. We'll leave it there for the time. And what we now need to do is to we've got the front kind of reflecting the light, but not very much. The sides are completely black, so we'll need to work on that. So let's start off by going to the material options, because that's where we need to work now. We're going to turn up the reflection intensity, which is by default I think set at 0. That hasn't done very much. We'll turn the specular intensity up. Let's brighten things up just a tiny amount, and we'll take the specular shininess up. And what that does, let's just close this view here. that gives us this nice gradient there. That's really cool. I think we can take the metal down a little bit. That's it. That looks brilliant. We've got that little highlight there, and then everything is looking pretty cool. We're still not getting any response from the sides or the bevel, so let's go up to animation and work with the sides and the bevel. So we're going to go to bevel, change the color, RGB. We get this really nice looking kind of brilliant red going on there. That's pretty cool, but we want something really bright. So we're going to take this pretty much all the way to white. I've chosen a very dark gray. Let's take the saturation is at 4%, which is next to nothing, but the brightness is at 100%. The hue is at 0, so more or less white with a touch of pink. And we will do the same for the sides, I think. So we'll just go to the sides, choose color, and just sample the color from there, and that's looking brilliant. Now you can see these intense reflections there, and if I change the quality to the final quality, that's at 2. We can actually come up here and change that to, well, it's actually at 3, so we can change that maybe to 7, just see how that looks. That's just too intense. It's cool, but too intense. I mean, I'm going for a far more intense feel to this design than you will get with the Fast and Furious posters, but that's all useful for just demonstrating how everything's going to fit together. Now, the way to deal with this really intense reflection is either to work with the material, and we can actually change the material settings for the reflection sharpness, and that will also possibly help with anti-aliasing. Maybe it might not, but the other thing we can do is to blur out our environment. So we'll go to the environment layer, unshy it, and what we're going to do is to apply a Fast and Furious blur. So we'll just type in Fast and drop the Fast blur there, and just give it a blur of, let me just change the render settings back down to, I think we were working okay at 3, so I'm going to change them down to 3, hit OK, and what we'll do is just add some blurriness there to 52. And you can see here, this is how I introduce some blurriness, the sort of motion blur into the car. I just chose horizontal, and that gave us kind of a motion blur feel to the background here. But what you can see is that the reflections are now not too intense. And because if we change the reflection sharpness for this project down, that will involve more render time. So I'm going to keep it like this, but I just want you to be aware that you've got this option of reducing the reflection sharpness. So for this particular project, what you could do is go to the properties for the bevel and maybe the sides, and just reduce the reflection sharpness from 100. The front, I want to retain its reflection sharpness. So what I'll do for this one is leave it with 100% reflection sharpness and just rely on this blurred out environment layer to reduce that intensity of reflection. Now the front text is looking pretty much as I want it to look, so I'm going to leave it, and we'll start working on the back letter. This is where things get a little bit tough. I'm going to come to this animator here, which has got the bevel and side color. What we'll do is to copy the settings for this animator. So Control C, and we'll actually paste them for the 6. Control V. And nothing happens because we've got no extrusion. So let's extrude the 6. And we want a small extrusion there, maybe 20. And let's just look at the animation there. So we've got the animator, we've got the bevel and the side color, and what we'll do is work with the materials. And what I'm going to do first of all is to increase the reflection intensity to 100, and immediately that gives us some interesting stuff going on there. I really like the reflections which are now beginning to occur in the text there. And what I want to do is just to try to emphasize the bevel and the sides but we'll do that as we work. And the main thing is that I think at the moment the 6 looks pretty dull and boring. I just want to make it look a little bit more interesting, so we might actually just turn this layer off and focus on the 6. We'll take the bevel and increase that to 10 and actually change it to convex so that something actually happens, and that looks fantastic. We'll now go to the materials and work with the materials. I'm going to focus on these settings here, so I'm going to try out different things. We'll take the specular intensity down maybe to 40%. We want just a slightly less bright 6, because I think when it's very bright it dominates the other letters in the design. We can take the specular shininess up, and that should dull. That's excellent. That's giving us this little highlight there, and that's fantastic. We'll maybe take the diffuse down a little bit as well. Take that down to 40%. Specular shininess might go up a little bit more. The other thing that helps to introduce some interesting detail into a design like this is the reflection fall off. So if we take that up to 40%, you can see we get this really soft difference between the highlighted area there and the darker area. So we can take that down maybe to 36, 25. So it's about playing one setting off against another. I'm going to take the reflection fall off to 25. And we'll take the metal down to 90. Maybe even lower than that, 50. That's a bit too bright. But you can see how we're getting some hot spots and some shadows, and these materials are really important in getting exactly the feel that you like. So I'm going to stop there. We've got a 6 which is not going to be too dominant, and it's not going to be too much faded into the background, so we can bring the other text, and you can see now we've got the two things. They're kind of competing against each other and playing off against each other as well. So, but nothing is dominating the other thing, and that's what I want. I want the two to be, I want the background and the foreground each to have its own space. I think that bevel, I think that extrusion is way too intense, so I'm going to reduce that. So the front extrusion, I'm going to reduce that maybe to 30. And that's looking a bit more cool. And I think that's more or less it. We've got more or less the feel that I want. We can just go and change the render settings. Take that up to 11. That's the kind of result that we get. It's always possible to tweak things around and just change this and change that and get a slightly different feel, but I think that looks pretty awesome. It's not quite as dynamic or as sexy as the original poster, but we weren't going for that. We're going for something pretty straightforward, and I think it's a really neat way of demonstrating the kind of thing that you can achieve inside of After Effects. Now, one thing you might want to do if you wanted to take this further is to go to the Fast and Furious text. I'm going to change the render settings down a little bit. Let's take them down to 3. And what you could do is to add a property for the back. So something like color, for instance. We could change the color for the back, and what that would do is that it would allow the reflections. Let's make it pure white and see what happens. We've got slightly more intense reflections happening there in the back, and that's something that would, that's one way of controlling how intense these reflections are. So if you wanted really, really bright reflections, you could go ahead and work with the settings for the back and just animate that. That's a render setting of 11 completed, and obviously as we change the settings for the back of this text, of the front text, we'll be able to see the results in the reflection that we're getting in the 6. But that is pretty much what I was hoping for. So I hope you found that useful. It's a few interesting ideas about how to work with text and how to rearrange the text. Also some interesting ideas about how to work with the materials. I think that's a pretty decent outcome, so I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks for watching. I hope you found it useful. Till next time, take care. See you then. Bye.